Hello, I'm Sundar Raghavan, Senior Database Specialist Solution Architect with AWS. I'm here today to talk about how Amazon RDS for Oracle Database integrates with Kerberos and AWS Directory Service for Microsoft Active Directory. Amazon Relational Database, simply Amazon RDS, makes it easy to set up, operate, scale a relational database in the cloud. It provides cost-efficient and resizable capacity while automating time-consuming administration tasks such as hardware provisioning, database setup, patching, and backups. Amazon RDS support for Kerberos and Microsoft Active Directory provides the benefit of single sign-on and centralized authentication of database users. Keeping all of your user credentials in the same Active Directory will save you time and effort, as you will now have a centralized place for storing and managing them for multiple database instances. With that in mind, let's dive deep a little more and then see some more details about this integration. And I'll quickly walk through a small demo about this.
As we talked about, let's dive deep into this integration discussion. Before diving deep into the authentication integration discussion, so I would like to highlight the difference between authentication and authorization. Authentication is validating who the user says he or she is before letting him or her into the database, whereas authorization is what an authenticated user is entitled to have access to. The scope of this discussion is authentication. Kerberos is a network authentication protocol that uses tickets and symmetric key cryptography to eliminate the need to transmit passwords over network. Kerberos has been built into the Active Directory and is designed to authenticate users to network resources such as databases. Microsoft has incorporated the Kerberos protocol as the default authentication method in Windows, and it's an integral component of the Windows Active Directory service. At the core, essentially a client would be requesting the managed Active Directory for Kerberos ticket, and with the Kerberos ticket, it will communicate to the database and get authenticated, and it will establish the connection. So the steps involved in integrating Kerberos authentication for RDS involves this. Essentially, we'll be creating a directory and creating the appropriate role, and then granting that role, using the role so that the RDS could access the managed directory, and creating the database user. Yes, you will be creating a standard user, but there's a slight difference in the way the authentication mechanism is specified. Instead of specifying that identified by password, then you'll be saying that refer to the external authentication system. And finally, you need to configure the client. Keep in mind, this integration works only with the managed Active Directory that comes with the AWS Active Directory service at this time. However, it is possible to set a two-way trust between your corporate Active Directory and the managed Active Directory in AWS. So the steps, the screens that you see, you'll first create a directory, manage Active Directory, and then you'll create the appropriate role, and then you'll indicate what type of authentication mechanism you want to use for the database. Note that the password and IAM database authentication and password and Kerberos authentication, you can choose only one, which means these two are mutually exclusive and you can have only one method of authentication. You cannot have both for the same instance. Here is what happens at the high level when a request is made for authentication. A client request, so in general, Kerberos Distribution Center is kind of a open source software that maintains, that's part of the AD. It has its own database with users, list of users that matches to the list of users in the Active Directory. So the list of users that's maintained there in the KDC is called principal. So when a client requests for access, a request is sent to the authentication server component of the KDC, and acknowledgement is obtained back with a session key. And that key is used to send requests to ticket granting server of the same KDC, and actual key is obtained back, and that key is used to communicate with the application server, in this case, which is the database. So then with the prior communication established between the application server and database, and they know each other, and this communication is authenticated, and that's how it works. So what are the benefits of external integration, such as AD? Many enterprises would want to manage, monitor, and audit all their RDS instances with common user and methods. Having a central and common accounts to all these with the ability to manage them at one place would give the great advantage to implement common password policies, credentials, password life cycles, etc. And also, as slide says, then you can have database and the managed Active Directory sitting in two different VPCs. As long as the VPCs are VPC peered or transit gateway exists, you can still be able to integrate these two. Now let's quickly compare how RDS Oracle integration with managed AD for AWS Directory Service and IAM differs in the way it works. With the RDS database user authentication with managed AD, passwords are identified externally, whereas when it is integrated with IAM, STS tokens are generated and is used to connect to the database. With RDS and AD, users would have to be created in the database, while in the case of RDS and IAM users could be used to connect to the database as long as roles and policies are defined appropriately. With RDS and AD, managed AD in the AWS could establish two-way trust to the on-prem AD. However, users should be created in the database. With IAM users would have to be created in the IAM, but you don't have to take any action in the database. With RDS with IAM, the STS token has a time limit of 15 minutes. And hence, if the same user needs to be connected to the database and open up another connection, after 15 minutes, a new key would have to be generated. No such restriction exists with RDS and AD. When it comes to RDS integration with Oracle with an Active Directory, there are some best practices. It's more of a restriction. So Oracle expects the users and also the users with the domain to be created in the uppercase, regardless whether it is uppercase or lowercase in the Active Directory setup. So this is how users are created. As you can see, typically a user is created in the Oracle with identified by password, but in the case of AD integrations, identified externally, and that keyword will indicate that the authentication should happen outside the database. So these are the points that I thought I would discuss now, and then we'll quickly walk through how things are set up, and then I will show you a quick walkthrough of the demo. Let me walk through this demo environment. First step is to create the directory using AWS Directory Service for Microsoft AD. In this case, I have created this directory, and I need to note down the directory name and the password I set for the admin user. At this time, we can create the cross trust to the on-prem AD if that step exists. In my case, I don't have on-prem AD, but this time you can do this. And the next step is to create IAM role. In my case, I created this IAM role, but with the specific pre-created managed policy, Amazon RDS Directory Service Access. I also created this role with Amazon EC2 Full Access because I'm going to give this role to the EC2 instance, Windows instance that I just created. This is because I'm going to use this Windows machine to be part of the domain I just created that came with the managed AD, so that I can install the AD admin tool or any other admin tool that I need for managing the database, SQL Developer, for example. So once the EC2 instance is up and running with the AD admin tool installed and also being part of the domain, and the SQL Developer installed, then I'm ready to start the configuration and testing. So at this point, I can go back and create the RDS instance. In my case, RDS instance is also created. And when you create the RDS instance, you have the option to specify what type of authentication you want, and I picked up Kerberos authentication. And at the time, a pop-up drop-down menu will come, and I can choose the type of the directory I just created. And once I have this thing set up, now I think I'm ready to start using the demo. So when I log into the EC2 instance, I have this tool called the AD admin tool, under which I created some user and played with it. So let's create one more user, and then we'll see how this user can be configured on the database side to connect to the database. So let's create a user. This is the user I'm creating. And let me create it with the uppercase so that I'll show you the how it turns out to be configured on the Oracle side. So regardless of whether you have the lowercase, uppercase combination on the AD side, you still have to use everything in the uppercase. Okay. So now let's create this. And then password is, we'll create the password. Now my user is created. Okay. So once this user is created, now I can go back and then configure the database side. So let me go and configure the database. And I already prepared a script for this. So I'm going to use this to create the database on the database side. On my Windows machine, I have the SQL developer installed, and I've already established the connection as the regular admin connection. So the rest of the connections are all disconnected, and I'll make sure that it's all disconnected. Okay, so now I'm going to log in as a regular admin user. This is the user that was created as admin user at the time of creating the RDS instance. Now I connect to this database as admin user. So at this point, we are still connecting. We are not using the RDS Kerberos connection. So I'll create this user called user01, and I specify that is identified externally. Let's do this. User is created. Now we also need to give create session to this user, because database just created the user now at this point, and then we need to create give this the necessary permission for the users to connect to this user schema and create a session. So now we create this and give the permission, and it's done. Now I've also created a user called user01 here, and this is the one. And I also have the database user at this point. So now let's go back and create a connection using the SQL developer. So for testing or using a Kerberos connection, your client needs to have the capability to connect using Kerberos. So in this SQL developer case, I'm going to create a new connection called, let's call it as user1. So I'm going to create a new connection here. So let's go to the new connection. Let's get these metrics, these values I typed it and prepared it before. So let me share that here. So I'm going to call the connection name as database to the database name, and then the username, mentioning that it's going to be Kerberos. The username is going to be this. It's the user01. And this is exactly the format you should be doing it. So even though the user01 we created in the Active Directory was lowercase, we're still going to give it the uppercase. Then the password is the password that we gave in the AD screen. So it is the domain password. Now we'll say the save password. So this is how you can create a connection in the SQL developer. So when you create it, the username should be the one that we use in our command script, and the password, we'll enter the password. This is the domain password. So the username at this point is, we are trying to use the domain user to log into the database. So this is the domain password I'm entering. Other thing that I need to make sure is this Kerberos authentication is checked, and this is the one that's going to differentiate this connection. So once we test it, and then we make sure the test is successful, and we can save it. And then once you save it, then you can go back and let's connect to this database. Then see what kind of users are created. So let's run this query. As you can see, today we created a new user, and that's the user 1, and this is the format, and that was created today. And I tested the other one earlier today, but that's still there. So in a sense, the username I created is from the Active Directory, this user, and that's how we use the Active Directory domain user to connect to the database. With that, I'm concluding this demo.
Now that you have seen the demo, we hope that you can use this feature in your environment and get the benefit. Thank you for watching, and happy cloud computing.